Article 6. Women with Disabilities. I'm the parent of a young woman with a severe disability. We find getting caregivers to work in our home extremely difficult, and finding programs that are meaningful for her to attend is really hard. Survey Respondent. Introduction. Article 6 recognizes that disabled women and girls can be subject to discrimination on the basis of both gender and disability, resulting in cumulative disadvantage. Ensuring equitable exercise of rights and freedoms therefore requires active measures for the advancement of disabled women and girls. General comment. A whole-of-government and intersectional approach is necessary to secure full and equal participation for all disabled women and girls in society. Disabled women, including Indigenous disabled women, must be involved in all matters affecting them, particularly in gender equity initiatives. The Disability Committee notes that globally, women and girls with disabilities face barriers in most areas of life. Endnote 58. Of particular concern is the greater risk of disabled women and girls experiencing violence. Endnote 59. Although there is little local research on disabled women and girls in general or their experience of violence specifically, combining global evidence with this country's high levels of family violence, Endnote 60, it is highly likely that disabled women in New Zealand face these same elevated risks. Importance of Article 6 to disabled people in New Zealand. Disabled women and girls in New Zealand want and expect to have their voice and concerns heard by decision-makers, but indicate it is a struggle to have their concerns acknowledged or acted upon. As indicated in the government's response to the Disability Committee's list of issues for New Zealand, disabled women leaders have been included in some national reference, governance and advisory groups in recent years. Disabled women in New Zealand face a range of inequities. Violence toward disabled women was the top concern expressed during consultations with disabled women held by the Human Rights Commission in 2018 to inform their submission for the 7th Periodic Review of New Zealand under the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Endnote 61. As part of the right to health, disabled women should have equal access to mainstream sexual and reproductive services, violence reduction initiatives, and health screening and specialist services when required. A recent report by the YWCA, previously Young Women's Christian Association, confirms that in New Zealand this is not universally the case, with disabled women still encountering inaccessible products, services, and communication channels. Endnote 62. For disabled women in New Zealand to achieve an adequate standard of living, targeted and tailored programs, including temporary special measures, affirmative action, Endnote 63, need to be in place to address the disparate employment outcomes disabled women face compared to both non-disabled men and women and disabled male peers. If disabled women are not an integral part of the design and development of initiatives to address gender-based disadvantages, there is a risk of leaving disabled women behind. Current place of Article 6 in law and practice. There is little recognition in the New Zealand legislative or policy framework of the intersectional discrimination and cumulative risk that disabled women may face. As noted in the government's response to the Disability Committee's list of issues, some cabinet papers are required to consider disability impacts. However, there is no requirement for disability perspectives to include an intersection with gender or any other characteristic, such as recognising Indigenous peoples. The only legislation particular to disabled women is that constraining rights to bodily autonomy. In the Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act 1977, contraception, Section 4, or termination, Section 34, are permitted without the person's consent. Sections of the Adoption Act 1955 are likely to disproportionately impact disabled women as primary caregivers. For example, Section 8(1)(b) allows for children of disabled parents to be removed for adoption without parental agreement in certain circumstances. In 2016, a number of aspects of this legislation were found to be discriminatory by the Human Rights Review Tribunal. End note 64. The government has not yet made any amendment to this law. The Ministry of Justice has indicated to the IMM that reform of adoption law is on its work program and that the Human Rights Review Tribunal decision will be taken into account. In July 2019, the Family Violence Act 2018 came into effect, replacing the Domestic Violence Act of 1995. Of potential benefit to disabled women was the clarification that a carer relationship can be a type of family relationship for the purposes of invoking the protective elements of the Act, for example, protection orders. In May 2019, the government announced a $320 million investment in family and sexual violence services. End note 65. Included in expanded prevention programs is $2 million to research or better understand the needs of particular communities. Disability is included in this work stream alongside youth, elderly, new migrants, and LGBTQIA+ communities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, plus. The New Zealand Police do not collect disaggregated statistics on sexual and other violent crime towards disabled women. There is currently only one generic code, 1M, broadly referring to mental, to record attendance to incidents of concern, harm, or crime towards disabled people. This makes it difficult to accurately assess, record, and monitor disparate access or disproportionately poorer outcomes for disabled women. End note 66. As part of the State Services Commission's Diversity and Inclusion Program, the Ministry for Women developed a gender analysis policy tool called Bringing Gender In. End note 67. This tool guides the inclusion of gender issues and supports the policy development process. It reflects an intersectional approach, recognizing the diversity of women and prompting policymakers to analyze different effects for different populations of women, including disabled women. Committee's previous dialogue with the state on Article 6. The Disability Committee made 2 recommendations in its 2014 concluding observations with regard to disabled women. End note 68. The committee recommends that this work be continued and strengthened to assist women with disabilities in obtaining education and employment and in combating domestic violence. The committee also recommends that organizations representing women and girls with disabilities be involved in these programs. In response, the government noted that this work was in progress, with the work being integrated into the long-term work program to improve employment outcomes and the Ministerial Group on Family Violence and Sexual Violence work program. End note 69. Comment on the realization of Article 6 in New Zealand. Definitive analysis of disabled women's and girls' realities is challenging in the absence of robust intersectional data about disability and gender. Data gaps affect the development of legislative, policy, and service responses to the multiple forms of discrimination disabled women and girls may face. Available evidence demonstrates that disabled women are marginalized in a range of outcomes, particularly in employment and parity in income. Disabled women, end note 70, have lower labour force participation rates than non-disabled women, 46% versus 71%, and disabled men, 46% versus 54%. Have higher unemployment rates than non-disabled women, 10% versus 6%, and disabled men and non-disabled men, 8% versus 5%. Are less likely to be in full-time employment than either non-disabled women or disabled men, and are more likely, 66%, than disabled men, 51%, to earn $30,000 or less. This results in disabled women bearing a disproportionate burden of poverty. This can be made worse by the costs of health, sexual and reproductive services, which may be higher due to inaccessible infrastructure. End note 71. An intersectional forum on disability and sexuality was held during the ILGA World Conference in New Zealand in March 2019. Women expressed and affirmed issues around disabled people frequently being regarded as sexual and needing to be shielded from relationships. These types of views led to a lack of education about relationships, consent and sex, which potentially places some disabled women at greater risk of exploitation and abuse, a situation reflected in the recent YWCA report. Research suggests that women with intellectual disabilities do not access publicly funded breast or cervical screening programs to the same degree as non-disabled women. The IMM acknowledges that the New Zealand Disability Action Plan 2019 to 2023 refers to a work program by the Ministry of Health to improve access to quality health care and health outcomes for disabled people generally. However, barriers arising from physical inaccessibility of facilities or equipment continue to prevent disabled women accessing these healthcare services. This lack of reasonable accommodation effectively constitutes discrimination. Endnote 72. Consultations conducted by the HRC in 2018 to inform its submission to the committee on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women showed violence and abuse as the highest priority concern for disabled women. Compounding this concern was the inaccessibility of some women's refuges, shelters, in terms of both physical access and staff knowledge or confidence in disability responsiveness. This means disabled women wishing to escape a violent situation may have nowhere to go. Endnote 73. Further, as victims of sexual violence, people with disabilities face a disproportionate disadvantage at the point of disclosure, reporting that they are less likely to be believed and are often perceived as asexual. Endnote 74. In 2016, the Government Family Violence Prevention Programme, It's Not OK, produced a resource for disabled people and carers called Domestic Violence and Disabled People. Endnote 75. This resource recognises particular risks for disabled people in general and disabled women in particular, and is designed to build disabled people's knowledge of their rights and their recognition of behaviour that constitutes abuse. In 2018, the Disability Rights Commissioner joined the Ministry of Social Development to convene the Family Violence Prevention Expert Advisory Group to ensure disability-inclusive responses. While some violence prevention initiatives have included recognition of disability, there is no nationwide strategy to address violence and abuse towards disabled women or girls. The perceived absence of priority attention to issues of concern for disabled women, including violence, was highlighted during the consultation hui and survey informing this report. A Disabled Women's Forum, supported by CCS Disability Action, is considering formalising its structure to fulfil the characteristics of a disabled people's organisation. The purpose of such a group would be to ensure the voices and issues of disabled women are included within decision-making systems. A recent report from the YWCA suggests that New Zealand is the only signatory to the Disability Convention that does not have a Women's Disabled People's Organisation. Endnote 76. Recommendations. The IMM recommends that the government 13. Actively consult disabled women and girls where appropriate in legislative and policy development, decision-making, program monitoring and violence prevention measures. 14. Strengthen intersectional approaches that integrate disability perspectives within gender equity initiatives and gender perspectives within disability initiatives, including the collection and analysis of data. 15. In partnership with disabled women, conduct accessibility audits of violence prevention and response services, including those provided by third parties, to ensure that they are inclusive and accessible, and staff have access to appropriate training. 16. Ensure that all women's health and sexual and reproductive services, including those provided by third parties, are provided in accessible facilities and information on these services is provided in accessible formats. 17. Institute temporary special measures, affirmative action, aimed at accelerating equitable participation of disabled women in employment.